together in large groups.
But furries do tend to be, believe it or not, social creatures. People say, oh, I'm an introvert. Okay, maybe you are, but you still need companionship. All right. They asked me to talk about how this all started. I always said it started back around the time we were starting to climb down out of the trees. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. Mankind has been fascinated with the animals with whom he shared his planet since the dawn of human imagination, when we first tried to understand these creatures. And for us, what better way to understand them than to imbue our qualities on them, to see them like us. There's a little exchange that I've often used about, it's been quoted left and right. But I like to imagine my early ancestors asking each other, what stories do the wolves tell around their fire? Because I'm certain they said something like that. The earliest known piece of human artwork, an item that was worked by the hand of man, is a figure of a humanoid lion. So the oldest known piece of artwork is furry. And that's true. We have always had that connection with that fascination with animals. You might say that it manifested to a certain degree with the birth of cartoons. They started animation. Shortly after moving pictures became a thing, we started creating cartoon characters. And what were the cartoon characters? They were animals. They were primarily animals. And I asked an older gentleman, a gentleman named Dan DiCarlo, one of the greats of the comic industry, why this was. And he explained, very likely, he said, animals are easier to draw. You can get it wrong and nobody's going to say anything. With a human, okay, let's look at Popeye. Popeye's a nightmare. I mean, he's missing a freaking eye. That's why he's called that. And he's got like this elephantiasis in his arms here. And Olive Oil, what is she? It's like she had her bones removed surgically at the age of 19. You ever see her arms? So yeah, cartoons throughout the 30s, and the absolute heyday of animation, the 40s and the 50s and into the 60s. Cartoon characters were animals, almost exclusively animals. And then, for those of you who remember those dark days of the 70s, when the animation industry was kind of a little bit lean, they started trying to save money where they could, and you can tell. I mean, the old-time animators had retired by now, and nobody was replacing them. For example, the 70s Tom and Jerry cartoons, I went to get all of the prints and burn them. It was dreadful. There was, in the late 80s and into the 90s, a renaissance of cartoon animation. That was when Animaniacs came out and other such things. The early 90s was great. We had Road Rovers came out. We had SWAT Cats. And I don't know if there is an absolute connection, but they were coming out at the time that what we now call furry fandom was coming into being. And I don't know if it's a case of convergent or divergent evolution. Let me explain. There was nothing called furry fandom prior to 1980. We had what we called funny animals. They based that title off of a comic, a 4-color comic that came out in the 50s, Funny Animals. And that's what animal characters were. If you were an animal character, you were a coyote that would fall off of a cliff and get up and dust himself off and buy something else from Acme. In 1980, at NorriesCon 2, an artist by the name of Steve Galacci put a painting into the art show of a feline character, basically a feline space marine character by the name of Irma Felna. And a fairly substantial group of people clustered around it and fell in love. They were initially called the Galacci Group or the Galacci Gang, but he immediately had a fan following, not only for him, but for this character. And then some of these folks said, oh boy, this is cool. And they realized there were other artists out there that were interested in drawing these characters, so they started to get together at conventions, at science fiction conventions. You would have a room party. They started what's known as an Amateur Press Association, an APA. I don't think they have them anymore. An APA, they were a publication, but it was a contribution-based publication. It wasn't something you go buy at the store, it was essentially a club. You would contribute something to this magazine that came out, and they called that Rower Brazzle, which is difficult to say. Props if anybody knows where the name originally came from. No. I would say it was a word that was a bastardization of a word used in the Pogo Possum comic strip, but 90% of the people in the room are going to say, who? That too is part of our history. In the days when, in the 50s, when McCarthyism was sweeping the land, you didn't speak up against the government in those days. It was, to date, the most frightening and close to totalitarian time in American history. But there was one man willing to lampoon it, and that was Walt Kelly in his strip Pogo Possum. And he would create these outlandish characters that were very thinly veiled representations of these politicians. They tried to shut him down, and it was sort of an early example of the Streisand effect. The more they tried to shut him down, the more people looked at his strip. And, well, so we'll take ourselves back to 1980. We have this group of guys. One of them was a fellow named Mark Melino, and it is unsure who came up with the original term, but it's very likely to have been Mark. Furry. How do we describe this fandom? The Galacci Group, that's too many syllables. Do you notice that Americans especially don't like syllables? You try to shorten everything to the fewest number of syllables. So, Galacci Group, that's too many, but furry, that rolls off the tongue a lot easier. So they would start having parties. And then there would be a room party, just what we have here, advertised. They'd put a sign on the message board, hey, furry party, room 1218, 8 o'clock Friday. And it was mostly artists for the first couple of years. They would get together with the black Strathmore sketchbooks, and they would sketch for each other, and they would hand the sketchbooks around. And I heard a description of a furry party in those days. You would go to a room party and there'd be the unce, and they didn't unce back then, they had something similar. It was very synthetic. And then they'd be like having, people talking, and it would be loud, and the security would come and shut them down. The furry party was usually silent. You'd go in and all you would hear would be the scratch of pencils on paper. And then occasionally a voice, that was pretty good. But more and more people started to become aware of these furry parties and started going to them. And now they were turning into actual social events. the artists discovered that not only do they like drawing these things, but there is a fan base, just like there was that cluster of people around the painting of Irma Fauna at NorrisCon in 1980. And toward the end of 1980, these room parties were kind of getting out of hand. They were getting too big. They were spilling out in the hallway. Convention organizers don't like it when parties spill out into the hallway. I'm just saying. So, a bunch of fellas in Southern California said, let's see if we can actually have a convention of our own. The impetus for it was, of course, size. We need more space. But there was also an early phenomenon showing up. We had the furries. We even had the birth of the furry haters, who, I don't know where the heck these people crawled out of, but there is a famous photo. Anybody here under 18? I am going to use coarse language because in its historical context. So if you don't like it, kiss my ass, okay? You can leave now. One of the signs, furry party, room 1218, 8 o'clock Friday. Friday. I said not 8 o'clock Saturday, 8 o'clock Friday. Somebody else had pasted another sign over it that simply read, skunk fuckers. Well, that was a little insulting, but it was kind of cool, so the name stuck. Furries would occasionally refer to those, there's a skunk fucker party. So, 1988 or 89, something like that. I'd have to do the math, and I'm a chemist. That's not my thing. They essentially held a big house party as an experiment. Is there enough interest to support a convention? So, they threw what was basically a house party, and there was definitely enough interest because you had people sleeping on the lawn, you had people in the attic, So the following year, they actually got a hotel, and they called it Conference, because it was a play on words, getting conference, see what they did there, it's got fur in the middle, that was very clever back then. And that was, that would have been 1989. They called that house party previously Conference Zero, retroactively. That was the initial con. Now, here is where I run into difficult political territory. Forgive me. There is debate, even until today, as to the nature of the early conferences in the early 90s. I was there. I saw quite a lot of things. My personal observation was that there was no concern for or attempt to have any influence over public decorum. It was said, rumor and innuendo said, that the organizers were deliberately marketing the convention to certain California subcultures who were showing up in droves. And it made for an atmosphere that was, number one, a little uncomfortable for more stuffy sorts as myself. Imagine me being stuffy, anyway. But it didn't make for a very good public impression. That was how the world was seeing this burgeoning thing, furry fandom. And it was difficult, to say the least. Also, at about that time, 91, 92, the third or fourth conference, we started to see the emergence of a world-changing global phenomenon. Whereas intellectuals and academics had been getting together on little things we called ARPANET, or bulletin boards, things you had to physically dial into on your phone. We were now starting to see computers becoming connected locally and then region-wide and worldwide. There was in those days an online thing called a MUD. That stands for Multi-User Dungeon. It was an outgrowth of the role-playing craze of the 1980s, when Dungeons and Dragons was the big thing. Instead of getting together with your friends at Stan's house and up in the big room that his parents had upstairs, they had a table and you'd sit around it and you'd eat Cheetos and your little lead figures and stuff. Now you can get together with people from far-flung areas and have your little role-playing / adventure games, the multi-user dungeon. I remember going on to one once, and it was, okay, create your character. There's my character. Okay, start the game. Type in start. And it would describe, it was text-based, all just scrolling text. Yes, you are in a room. This is what the room looks like. There is an elf in there. The elf just killed you. Okay, great. I did this 4 or 5 times, and I think I kept showing up the same goddamn elf, and that's it. But some fellas at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, coincidentally enough, wrote one of their own MUDs, if you will, and they intended it to be entirely furry, and they intended it to be a social gathering spot. Not a hack and slash, go in and type, kill character. Although, you could if you wanted to. But it was intended just to be a place to go and hang out and role play in a non-lethal fashion. And to differentiate it from the MUD, the multi-user dungeon, they would call these mucks. So you get it? Mud, muck. And they had weird mud, muck, mush. This was called furry muck. And furry muck became the global furry central. If you were interested in these furry characters, you could log in to furry muck anywhere in the world that had internet access at that time. And you could meet people. You would meet their characters, I just call them their avatars these days. In the early days of Furry Muck, when I first joined, I think there was a maximum of 200 users. I think there were 200 known furries in the world. And that helped to grow Conference, because now they weren't just getting the science fiction fan network. Word was getting out about furry, and this became a national and then international convention. It was getting, in topped 1,000 people, it was getting big. But still, no real effort to control public decorum. Forgive me if I use that word control. I can't think of a better one. I'll give you an example. As I said, this is a political minefield for me. I'm going to get flack for it. You know what? I've been getting flack for years. I did go ahead, okay? Yeah, I don't care. There was a hotel they had that had this lovely atrium on the 2nd floor overlooking the lobby, and this grand semicircular staircase that went up from the lobby. Very beautiful, marble and glass. It was very pretty. And I was going up the stairs, and bounding past me was a young gentleman, very fit young gentleman, who had done the most incredible body paint job. He had body painted himself as a rabbit. And as he went by, the first thing that struck me was, this must have taken hours. The artistry behind this was spectacular. It's like every single strand of fur had been drawn in, even little fur ruffles. It was incredible. That was the first thing that went through my mind. Look at that body paint. The second thing that went through my mind was, that's all he's wearing. I just turned around and went back downstairs. Okay. So there was a growing feeling in the community that, hey, we like having a furry convention, but we're a little embarrassed to be going here. Isn't there some way we can bring this down? Apparently there wasn't. About 1995 or 96, as I said, the internet had brought furry, this strange phenomenon, to the world. A group of kids in Germany said, you know, we can have one of these furry conventions ourselves. And they said that because when they speak English, they speak with German accents. See, I don't think they said it in English to themselves, but maybe they did. Because Europe, we were just starting to see a globalization of Europe at that time. The Iron Curtain had only been down for a couple of years. If you don't know what I mean by Iron Curtain, go the fuck back to school. Thank you. So they got together similarly in a house party and said, we are going to have a furry gathering. And they realized, we didn't realize that there's that many furries in all of Europe. So they put together their version that they called Eurofurrets. And it's really, really cute to look at the pictures from back then because they all look so young and happy. I'll be seeing them in a couple of days and they all look like they're 90 years old. Just like me. But anyway, so Eurofurrets became the second furry convention in the world. It was just getting off the ground, not really well known outside of Europe. In 1995, also, there was an incident in Philadelphia at PhilCon. We'll simply say there was a misunderstanding, a lack of communication between furry fans, a lack of communication between furry fans and the convention itself. And that caused at least one of the furry fans, a person who was very outspoken, but not by many people, to get the impression that PhilCon did not like furries. So this person decided the furries will hold our own convention right across the street, in the hotel across the street, on PhilCon's weekend as a sort of, up yours PhilCon. That was kind of not really the way to get off the ground with your neighbors, but it was surprisingly well attended. So the following year, that convention was held again, and it was moved to the shimmering golden metropolis of Newark, New Jersey. Yes, you can giggle at that one. It then was going to move to some place in Ohio, I think it was Maumee, that third largest city in the county, and it did not work. It didn't get off the ground. The con was canceled. But the country, the world, had been given a taste of another furry convention. Remember I said there was the growing idea that it's a little uncomfortable out here on the West Coast? Now there was another furry convention. And a group of young kids, it's always young kids, at RPI in New York, in Albany, said, hey, there's obviously interest in an East Coast furry convention. Why don't we throw one? How hard could it be? They called it Albany Anthrocon. The other one had been called Conference East, which caused a little confusion. That's another con coming up. But they decided we're just going to separate entirely and call this Albany Anthrocon. And they actually, perhaps as a reaction to people's feelings about what was going on in the West Coast, decided they were going to try to keep things clean. Okay, you want to have your artwork and stuff, okay, that's fine, but publicly they didn't want people, doing the bunny boy thing going up the stairs. I went to that convention. That was Albany Anthrocon, and I believe the theme that was announced that year was an East Coast furry convention. Accurate, if not overly imaginative. Albany was a mere 4 hours away, so I drove up there. And it was adorable. See, I had been in the science fiction fandom world since 1918 myself. Yes. I'd been volunteering. I had dabbled a little bit in staff. So I actually had a number of years of experience in the operations of a convention. And these guys didn't, and it was cute. I was like, oh boy, that's so cute. Watch this, watch what's gonna happen. An interesting phenomenon occurred at their art show. They were running the art show and art auction just as we had at conventions since they started. In those days, before you had Fur Affinity, before you had Inkblot, or whatever that thing's called, furry art was only available primarily at these conventions. So the art show, the art auction were the centerpiece of the convention. That was pretty much what everybody was there for. So the art auction was a grand show. I mean, the room would be packed. They would get auctioneers like the late Joe Mayhew, Phil Folio, really good performers to run the auctions as auction and entertainment at the same time. And at the first year of the auction at Albany Anthrocon, the auctioneer did not arrive on time. Nobody knew where the auctioneer was. There is a backstory to that, but that's a bar story. And we're not currently at the bar. He said, staring Alkali in the eye. But the art show, I guess he was the second in command of the art show. All the art was up front, all the staff was there, the audience was there, and there was just silence for 15 minutes as people shuffled around. And then the art show, second in command, bravely tried to salvage the art auction by doing it himself. I have never seen a more stage-frightened person. Typically, people who suffer this level of stage fright bolt off the stage. This guy, God bless his heart, stuck to his guns. And what I saw, sitting in the audience, I was sitting, as a matter of fact, right where Ronnie is, right here. And this guy got up, the first item is by Terry Smith, and it's Chester Ringtail. Bidding's at 80. Okay, 80. And that next piece is Rogue Minotaur, and it, called Panda Samurai. It's at 120. Okay, 120. You're laughing, but this is what happened. And my heart was starting to break. I was looking at this poor guy and saying, oh God, Somebody needs to rescue him. The 5th piece went to the bid sheet. Now, people who know me know that I have a very, very annoying and often fatal tendency to stick my nose into things. I felt so awful for the guy and I felt awful for the artist too, because there was no auction going on. After that 5th piece, I kind of got up and I said, "Excuse me, can I have a go at one?" And he said, "Please, please." So I got up there, I looked down, I was like, oh boy, I'm so unaccustomed to talking in front of people. I thought, okay, what would Joe Mayhew do? What would Phil Folio do? So I did what they would do. You see my auctioneering style, that's basically Phil Folio's style. I stole it from him. But it worked. You know, the audience got energized, we actually got bids, and the art show second in command ran up behind me and did this. I said, "Do you want me to do more?" He said, "Do the rest, do the rest." I remember as the last piece was being auctioned, the door opened in the back and in ran the auctioneer, who kind of looked somewhat crestfallen. I was like, "Oh, sorry." But people have been asking me to do art auctions ever since. So, yay.
You got 1 more hour.
I do, right. So, again, Albany Anthrocon 1997, it was a rocky, tentative start, but they had a hell of a lot of spirit. They had an incredible amount of enthusiasm. They understood where they had made some mistakes, and they were bound and determined to fix them the next year. A couple of months later, I was at the West Coast Convention, and it had reached a point where I had decided, okay, I can't come back here. I am terrified to be seen here. Somebody might take a picture and there would go my career. And there's now an East Coast Furry Convention. I know because that's what it says on the front of their con book. So I had decided I'm not going to go to the West Coast Convention after that. Again, my personal experience, my personal feelings. And at that convention, one of the executive members of the Albany Anthrocon came up to me and said, "Would you be our guest of honor next year?" And I said, "Yeah! I'd never been a guest of honor before. That sounds so cool." And it was great because I'm a cheap date. I just drive up there, I'm gonna give I was all excited. I'm gonna be guest of honor. Yay! I'm gonna first time, I get GOH, sign things. Guest of honor ain't here. I always tell the guests of honor at every convention this. I went in to Albany Anthrocon 1998 as guest of honor, and when I left, I was chairman. I'm driving home, yay, it was a great con, I got home, yeah, now I'm chairman. Wait. What? And I emailed, "Excuse me, am I chairman?" They said, "Yeah, that's you, yeah, you're chairman." And when did that happen? They said, "Oh, at the con." I said, "Did I agree to it?" They never actually wrote back. So I said, okay, if I'm going to be chairman, we're going to have to make some changes. Here's my terms. Number one, you cannot run this like a bunch of guys having a party in a fraternity basement. It's not sustainable. That first year, 97, they had several hundred people. Their membership doubled in 1998. I said, if you want this thing to keep going, it's going to have to be run as a business. It's going to have a management structure. It's going to have a budget. which was an unfamiliar word. It has to have structure. It will have departments. And they said, okay. And then I said, and it's gonna have to move out of Albany for two reasons. It was held over July 4th weekend. The reason it was held over July 4th weekend is Albany is desperate to see living bodies in the city on July 4th weekend. Because apparently everybody in the city flees to the Adirondacks on July 4th weekend, and the city is now the set of The Walking Dead. I remember standing in the middle of the street in their downtown business district on Saturday afternoon, and nothing, no human beings, no cars, newspaper blowing. The subway across the street was the only place open, and they ran out of bread by Sunday morning. So I said, that's reason number one. We have to move it out of Albany. We're going to move it down here to Philadelphia, where I am, and that's because of reason number two. I refuse to chair a convention that I have to drive 4 hours to.
Oops.
Well, that's how it felt then. So we moved it to the little town of King of Prussia, outside of Philadelphia. It's very close to Valley Forge. That's the name of the town, King of Prussia. And the city fathers will tell you that it is named for Frederick the Great, King of Prussia at the time, who was considered one of the finest, monarchs of European, etc., etc. That's almost true. In my area of Pennsylvania, where I grew up, in the colonial times, the town would usually be named for the most prominent feature, which invariably was the bar. In the early 1700s, there was a very, very large tavern called the King of Prussia, and that became the name of the town. Do not believe any of the city fathers in King of Prussia, or Bluebell, or Broadaxe, that, it was named after, Eric Broadaxe, a Viking. No, it was named after the bar, and I can prove it. But that's neither here nor there. They had a lovely, lovely Hilton Hotel in King of Prussia. It was one of my favorite places. Number one, I lived next door. And number two, it had my absolute favorite Japanese steakhouse in the basement called Kobe. So I said, we will have it here. And it is an ideal. We have this huge ballroom like this, where we can fit all the dealers. And we've got this here for performances. It will be great because that hotel has more space than we could ever conceivably need. We had over 1,000 people that next year in 1999, where the theme was the furry revolution. It was a multiple meaning, Valley Forge, and it's like, hey, we're going to reinvent furry fandom. And I kept that very, very stringent standard of conduct. In fact, I strengthened it because I had been so unnerved by the atmosphere that I had previously seen. There was no way I was going to allow that to happen here. And that is why Anthrocon to this day has the most stringent standards of conduct, or I should say, optimally stringent standards of conduct. And it's not even the most, because 90% of the conventions out there have adopted my standards of conduct. There, I said it. Anyway, we pretty much overflowed the hotel that first year. And we were pushing the walls out the second year. And it became very, very apparent to us that we could not stay in my beloved little Hilton Hotel any longer. So I started casting about, and was contacted by a massive convention hotel in Philadelphia called the Adams Mark. And they contacted me. Now, they had like an exhibition center, and everything we needed, and 3 times the number of rooms. So I contacted the board of directors and said, fear not, I got it covered. There's a hotel in Philadelphia that has got more space than we could ever conceivably need. We overflowed it the next year. And we continued to overflow it for the next 4 years. I won't get into the story of how Anasmark Corporation abruptly closed the hotel and announced it was going to be bulldozed and a target was going to be put there. That's a bar story too.
That's a great one.
Yeah, great for you, isn't it? Interestingly enough, about that time, as Anthrocon, as it was now known, was having this major period of growth, other conventions were starting to crop up. In 1999, Midwest FurFest cropped up. Now, I was told a story. Again, hearsay and innuendo. I was told a story that there had been a science fiction convention that I shall simply call the Science Fiction Convention, that had a very, very strong furry presence. There were a lot of furries there, and they had furry programming and stuff, a furry track. And as convention executive committees circulate, people leave, other people come in, they developed a particular feeling in this executive committee that, pardon me, furries aren't real science fiction fans. And this was, I was starting to see this in a lot of other science fiction conventions. This phenomenon of, we don't want you here. Science fiction is about books. We're a literary society. We don't want you media people. We don't want you furry people. We don't want, all you people that do the sword and sorcery. That's not real science fiction. It was turning into something exclusive as opposed to inclusive. So this science fiction convention, in not so many words, made the furries feel that they were no longer welcome. You are not real science fiction fans, you have no place here. So the furries, sadly, with their tails between their legs, slunk off and started their own little convention and said, we will call it Midwest FurFest. That first year, they were tremendously successful. And I was told that the science fiction convention dropped 50% of their membership the next year. The year after that, they invited me to be guest of honor for some reason. Didn't work. So, because I had seen that phenomenon firsthand, I try to be very sensitive to telling anybody, we don't want you at this convention. That's a furry thing. We try to include people. And that's been a hallmark of this fandom, and it's one of the things that attracts me to it. We had Midwest FurFest. When did Furry Week in Atlanta start up? 2004, about the year that Anthrocon got the phone call that, hey, remember that hotel? Nope, not there no more. And we were starting to cast about for some place for Anthrocon to go. And we were getting to the thought that we might actually have to, quit. I tried the Pennsylvania Convention Center in Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Convention Center and the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Philadelphia, I'm going to stare straight into the camera when I say this, were utterly uninterested in having Anthrocon's business in the city of Philadelphia. They showed zero enthusiasm and made no effort whatsoever to help us. Fuckers! Anyway, there, I said it. This talk may contain coarse language and adult themes. I apologize, I should have said that first. And about this time, I got a phone call from a representative of the city of Pittsburgh. And she said, hello, would you like to bring your convention to Pittsburgh? Now, I'm a Philadelphian. If you know anything about Pennsylvania, you got Philadelphia on this side, you got Pittsburgh on this side. Alabama's in the middle. We don't talk to each other. I had been to Pittsburgh. It was the center of the steel industry of the United States. When I was there, it looked like it. And I said to the lady, hell no! And she said, why not? And I said, well, I don't want to be ungentlemanly, but your city is a festering vat of pus. It's a smoking hellhole. I would much rather have my convention in Mordor. And I hung up on her. Very rude, very rude. The next day, she called back. And she said, we just happened to be in town. Why don't you have lunch with us? I thought, this is a persistent lady. Okay, since she's so persistent, and you're buying lunch, right? Let's go to this wonderful, expensive steakhouse I know. That sounds good. So I drove over there at lunchtime, and I walked in, and they had this big round table set up all over, like the whole half of the restaurant set off. And it had 10 seats around it. There were 9 people, all dressed very, very nicely, and they all stood up when I came in. And they were like, and this is from Visit Pittsburgh, this is what represented the mayor's office, this is from the West End, this is from the these people, and this is Allegheny County Tourism. And I'm like, yeah, great, lovely, great. And I sat down, and even before they put the menu in front of me, they were saying, you know, we can offer you, and we'll give you, we'll do this, and and this will be available to you, and you can have this, and this will be great, and we'll partner with this, and it was like, so, okay, wait, okay, stop. Everybody just stop. I want to make sure that we're clear, we're talking about a furry convention here, right? And one lady, her name was Jen Vasek, she is like the hero of this story, pulled out a 3-ring, I didn't know they made 3-ring binders with 24-inch rings. This thing was like, she's like, they had printed out, this is Old Days, right? They had printed out my webpage, they printed out Anthrocon's webpage, they printed out Tiger Wolf's What is Furry webpage, they printed out Peter Cat's webpage, they printed out some web pages I wish they had printed out. I said, my God, you guys really did your homework, and you still want us to come out there? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, the problem is your city is still a festering vat of pus. I couldn't justify it. So they kind of looked at each other, and then they brought out a briefcase and said, maybe you should consider this. And they opened the briefcase, and I looked inside. I remember smelling something like cherries. And when I woke up, I was in a Weston heavenly bed. And I got up, and my head hurt. And I looked out the window, and went, oh my God, I'm in Pittsburgh. That's a lie. That's the Uncle Kage Story Hour version. What happened was Jen said, okay, I appreciate your point of view. We're only going to ask one thing of you, and then we won't bother you anymore. I said, what's that? She said, please just come out and see the city. And I thought, well, okay, I got a gas mask at home, I could do that. So I made the arrangement. It was going to be, I think if I recall, the 8th of August, 2004, a Saturday. Pittsburgh is 5 hours away from Philadelphia. And that's another reason I'm not going to do your 5 hours to have my convention here. So I drove out. It's been said that Pittsburgh is the only city in North America that makes an entrance. There's 2 ways in. There's through a tunnel through a mountain ridge, and then there is a highway that comes around a very, very tall mountain. I came by the highway, and when I came round the bend, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun was shining, and I was dazzled by one of the most spectacular urban vistas I have ever seen. It looked like a postcard. And the first thought in my head was, my God, who put this beautiful city in front of Pittsburgh? My second thought was, these guys clean up good. Because the steel industry had moved out. Pittsburgh found itself with no smoke. So they decided, let's try wiping off the buildings. And they discovered the buildings were all different colors. And they had windows in them. So I went in, and remember I said they'd done their homework? I was met at the front of the Westin by Jen and by Representative of the Westin and a couple other people. They marched me right in to the original fish market restaurant and to a booth where there were 4 bottles of wine sitting. So I'm running short on time. So the summary is they basically got me drunk and had me agree to bring the convention to Pittsburgh. I don't think there's really any other way to say it. But by this time, furry conventions were starting to crop up all over the place. And we were attracting attention. We'd started attracting attention around even when Midwest FurFest came out, but more and more, the popular media was starting to turn its attention to furry fandom. It did not help. Remember I described the early days of our public face? That was the first impression the world had. And that was the impression the popular media was coming to us with, and it's very, very difficult to shake first impressions. People accuse me, they say, Uncle Kage tries to whitewash the fandom. Hell yes! Because I remember what it used to look like. Nothing wrong with putting a nice coat of paint on the old barn. You know, even if it's falling apart inside, at least it looks nice and the neighbors won't complain. Now, fortunately, we took a lot of hits in those days, but we're still here. That's the cool part, and we continue to grow. I can only count on the fingers of one finger conventions that are either stagnant or have lost attendance. Most of the conventions have seen increasing attendance as the years have gone on. Nobody knows how many furries there are in the world, and I don't know if we ever will. But if you take all of the attendance of the conventions, and even if you say, all right, half of the people are going to multiple conventions, there's well more than 20,000 of us out there. And more are showing up every day. It's not that we're making people furry. This is something I firmly believe in. Nobody walks up, utterly hating animals and thinking animals are stupid, and they walk through and there's something in the air, it gets into their bloodstream, and they walk out with a fursuit. Unless you're a lawyer. And even in that case, nobody becomes furry. I hear people say, when did you turn into a furry? No, you always were a furry. You just happened to find out there was a name for it, and that name is us. You're welcome. I am pretty much out of time unless there's any questions. Admittedly this history was geared a bit toward Anthrocon, but hell, it's my convention, I love it. Anyway, any questions? No questions? Oh yes, in the back, yes.
Did you ever apologize to people for calling their city
every year. I still, to this day, can't look Jen Vasek directly in the eye. When we meet, it's like, hi Jen. Yeah, you're not mad at me, right? And I am openly apologetic when the news media asks me about it. I am perfectly forthcoming. I say, look, I came here with a very, very unfair, preconceived notion about your city, and I have been proven wrong every single day that I've been here. Kind of like furry fandom. And the catchphrase that I give to the media, it's one that I am very, very heartfelt over. Again, I'm a native of Philly. I'm a Philadelphian, if you couldn't tell by the accent. I'm a Philadelphian. Once you have laid eyes on Pittsburgh, there's no going back. By the way, I still get emails from the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. They're filtered straight to trash. Not interested. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. You say that it was, based a lot around Anthrocon, but my question would be, would that be because Anthrocon has set the template for success?
I would like to say that Anthrocon has set the template for success. I would like to say something like Anthrocon sets the bar that other furry conventions want to achieve, but that would sound very self-serving, so I won't say that.
If I said it was deserved, would you accept that?
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Mr. Glasses.
How do you describe what furry is to someone who's never heard it before?
We are cartoon fans, sir. Everybody knows what a cartoon is. Yeah, we are fans of cartoon animals. Anthrocon is currently, Midwest FurFest is probably going to jump us this year because they're growing damn fast. Anthrocon is currently the world's largest gathering of people who are fascinated with the art of cartoon animals. That's what people understand. People say, what is a fursuit? A fursuit is, I say that it is walking artwork. The best description I ever heard, which I really ought to be using, when people say, what are these people? And the best description is, they're freelance mascots. Ain't that perfect? All right, I definitely got to go because there's something else in this room, but I want to thank you all very much. And again, all those bar stories, get me a drink sometime at the bar and we'll talk.